My father introduced me as the janitor at Thanksgiving dinner, and the guest sitting across from him dropped his fork. My name is Nora. I am 25 years old and I run the facilities operations at St. Vincent Regional Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. The building, the sanitation crews, the maintenance teams, the safety systems, 20 people at that table. Dad walked in with his wine glass and said to the room, "You all know Paige, my daughter the nurse, saves lives every day." Everyone smiled. Then he turned to me, "And this is Nora, she keeps the place running, mops, maintenance, you know how it is." He laughed. I said, "Dad," he said, "oh come on, I'm proud of you both. One saves lives, one cleans up after." Some people laughed. My mother looked at her plate. I had heard versions of this joke for 2 years. I smiled, then I looked across the table. A man I had never seen at a family dinner had set his fork down, very carefully. He was not laughing. He was watching my father, and my father had no idea who he was. The man folded his napkin, set it beside his plate. Looked at my father, he said, "Richard, I want to make sure I understand. Your daughter manages facilities operations at a regional hospital?" Dad laughed. He said, "Well, that's what it says on the business card." The man said, "It says that because that's what she does." Dad said, "James, it's a family joke. The man said, "She's not your maid, Richard. She's my boss." 20 people, complete silence. I felt my hands go cold under the table. Dad's smile stayed on his face, but his eyes changed completely. He said, "I'm sorry, what?" The man said, "I'm Dr. Harlow, Chief Medical Officer, St. Vincent Regional. Nora runs my building." He picked his fork back up. "The cranberry sauce is excellent, by the way." Nobody moved. The grandfather clock on the wall chimed once. My father was still holding his wine glass. He had not put it down. He did not seem to know what to do with it. Dad set his wine glass down. Finally, he said, "James, I had absolutely no idea you worked with Nora." "If I had known," Dr. Harlow said. "Richard," just his name. Dad stopped. Dr. Harlow said, "The issue isn't that I work with her." Dad looked around the table. He said, "Everyone, I want to be clear, I am incredibly proud of both my daughters. Nora knows that, right, Nora?" 20 people looked at me. I said, "Sure, Dad." He said, "See, she knows I'm joking. It's just how we talk in this family." Then Paige set her glass down. She said, "Dad." He said, "Paige," she said, "I've laughed at that joke for 2 years, every Christmas, every birthday." I laughed because it was easier than saying something. She stopped. Then she said, "I'm a nurse. I know exactly what Nora does. I know what happens to a hospital when facilities operations fail. I've known the whole time." She looked at me. "I'm sorry, Nora, I should have said something a long time ago." Mom was crying. Dad was still standing. He had nowhere to go. Dad tried one more time. He said, "Paige, come on. You know I didn't mean." Paige said, "I know you didn't mean it to land this way, but it landed, Dad. It always lands." Dad looked at Dr. Harlow. He said, "James, man to man, you understand this is just family humor. Every family has it." Dr. Harlow said, "Richard, I manage a hospital. I don't have the luxury of joking about the people who keep it running." "Neither does she." Dad sat down. He reached for his cranberry sauce. His hand wasn't completely steady. He said quietly to no one in particular, "I just think everyone is being a little sensitive tonight." Nobody answered that, not one person at that table. I looked at my plate. I looked at my fork. I thought about 20 people in 20 different ways this moment was going to be remembered. Then I thought, they all just watched my father try to make me small and fail. 3 times, in 5 minutes. That was enough. People started leaving earlier than usual. I was getting my coat from the hallway when I heard footsteps. Dr. Harlow, he said, "Nora, 1 minute." I turned around. He said, "I want to say something. Not as your CMO, as someone who was in that room." I waited. He said, "You have handled situations in that hospital that would have broken people twice your age. The time the East Wing flooded at 3 in the morning. The inspection we almost failed last March. You fixed both before I knew there was a problem. I want you to know I know that." I said, "Thank you, Dr. Harlow." He said, "I also want you to know tonight stays here. Your personal life is yours, but if you ever need me to say in any room what I said at that table, I will." He put his coat on and left. I stood in the hallway alone. I took my notebook out of my coat pocket. I didn't write anything yet, I just held it. If you have ever been truly seen by someone in a room where your own family made you invisible, you know exactly why I couldn't move. I called my uncle the next morning. My uncle David, Dad's older brother, who had been sitting 3 seats away the entire dinner. I said, "Uncle David, how do you know Dr. Harlow?" He said, "James, college roommates, 30 years. "Why?" I said, "Dad invited him to Thanksgiving." Silence. Then Uncle David said, "Richard didn't know who James was. I mentioned I had a friend in medicine visiting Columbus for the holiday. Richard said bring him." I said, "So Dad spent 20 minutes bragging about Paige to my boss, then made the janitor joke to my boss." Uncle David said, "Nora," I said, "he set the whole thing up himself. He invited the one person in that room who already knew exactly who I was, without knowing it." Uncle David said very quietly, "Yes." I said, "Did you know who Dr. Harlow was when Dad made the joke?" Long pause. He said, "Yes," I said, "and you didn't say anything." He said, no, I didn't and I should have. The realization settled over me right there on the phone. My father had walked himself into it, every single step, his own dinner, his own guest. His own joke. Dad called 3 days later. I let it ring, then I picked up. He said, Nora, I've been thinking about Thursday. I said, okay. He said, I want to apologize. In front of everyone like that wasn't right. I said, okay. He said, I didn't know James was I would never have said it if I had known who he was. I said, I know. He said, so we're good. I said, Dad. You're apologizing because my boss heard you, not because you said it. Silence. He said, that's not, I'm apologizing because I upset you. I said, you've been making that joke for 2 years, at Christmas, at my birthday. Dr. Harlow wasn't there for any of those. More silence. He said, Nora, I think you're being. I said, I have to get back to work. He said, can we talk more about this? I said, I don't think so. Not right now. I hung up. I took out my notebook. I wrote one line, then I closed it and went back to work. I run a building. It does not stop because my father finally heard himself. Dad called again Sunday. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. I listened once. He said he was sorry. He said he loved me. He said he wanted his daughter back. He said at the end, I just don't understand why you can't let this go. It was one dinner. I sat with that for a long time. One dinner, years of that joke in different rooms, Christmas, my birthday, every gathering where he needed someone to be less so Paige could be more. One dinner where someone finally said out loud what I had been thinking for 2 years. And now he wanted me to let it go. I wrote in my notebook 3 words. I did not call back. I did not text. I did not send a message through Mom or Paige or Uncle David. I chose silence the same way he had chosen that joke, deliberately and without apology. Some people learn what they cost you only when you stop paying. I was done paying. Paige called Wednesday night. I picked up. She said, I know you might not want to talk. I just need to say one thing and then I'll leave you alone. I said, okay. She said, I have been part of that joke for 2 years. I laughed. I changed the subject. I told myself it was harmless because it was easier than fighting Dad. Pause. And I'm ashamed of that. I said, Paige. She said, I'm not done. I think I let him do it because fighting Dad is exhausting, and because this is the part I'm most ashamed of, it was easier when you were the one he was doing it to. I said, I know. She said, I'm sorry, Nora. Not a family dinner sorry, a real one. I said, I know the difference. She said, can we fix this? I said, I don't know yet, but I appreciate you calling. She said, that's more than I deserve. I said, probably. We stayed on the phone without talking. That felt like something, not forgiveness, but something honest. Maybe that was where it had to start. Monday morning, I badged in through the loading dock the way I always do because that is where things actually run from. I walked the floor. Checked in with my sanitation lead, reviewed overnight maintenance logs, signed off on 3 safety inspections before 8 a.m., then I went upstairs and poured coffee and sat at my desk. Dr. Harlow passed my office at 8:15. He stopped in the doorway. He said, good morning. I said, good morning. That was all. It was enough. I had not called Dad back. I was not going to, not this week, maybe not this month, maybe not for longer than that. That was not anger, that was a decision. For 25 years I had smiled at that joke because keeping the peace felt like the only option I had. I know now that keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect are not always the same thing. If this story stayed with you, if someone has ever made you the punchline and called it love, please like this video, subscribe so you never miss one of these, and leave me a comment. Have you ever chosen your self-respect over keeping the peace? I used to think the hardest part of my job was keeping everything running. Now I know the hardest part is knowing your own worth in a room full of people who already decided it for you.